3. The trek was an uncomfortable one, but not for any reason of the climate or the difficulty of the terrain. Lear felt dejected amongst the women he had just rescued, and he wondered why they could not understand the motives of his actions. The Vanayar were silent and cool to him. He did not expect them to chatter with him, given that they were recovering from being captured and dragged away from their homes, nor did he expect them to fully trust him, given what other men had just done to them. Yet on every Vanayar face, he saw unmitigated hatred. Flitting amongst the women, Lear would catch a glimpse of one of the phantom goddesses. He ignored them, or at least he tried to. The phantoms seemed more inclined to appear now that he was not wearing the sign of Jebel Sag. He wondered if the magic of the sign and the magic of the phantoms was incompatible. Constantly his gaze was drawn back to Hulda, but she would only glare at him. Whatever tenderness she had felt towards him, it had now evaporated. Lear tried to keep his mind on the trek in the forest, but his thoughts kept returning with old, familiar, self-loathing jibes. Wretch. Failure. Worthless, the Cimmerian words echoed in his mind. Slave. Traitor, the Pictish words followed. Bondi, hold up, Sildar called. Lear stopped in his tracks and looked to his new master. Inwardly he thought, another label to add to the litany of all the kennings those that despise me use. Sildar, Ulan, and Joti approached him. Lear had no weapon, for Sildar had kept the spearhead. Lear prepared himself in case they meant to slaughter him. But instead of combat, the three Asir approached him with a vellum map. You know these mountains well, Sildar asked. Fairly, Lear replied. Joti and Ulan unfurled the map. Show me where you found the spearhead. Point to the location on this map, Sildar commanded. Lear frowned. He regarded the map and was surprised to find that it was a fairly accurate depiction of the area it represented. Several small terrain features were not represented, for the woods had changed since the map had been made. Long ago, an earthquake and a volcanic eruption had changed this part of the wilderness. Yet Lear did not spot the place where the barrow he had discovered would lay either. The map was simply too short. The barrow lay in terrain not present upon it. Do I lie? Lear asked himself. The place I found the spearhead is not on your map. It is farther south, Lear said, deciding to go with the truth. How far south? Sildar asked. Lear guessed. Perhaps another 4 inches on your map? About 40 miles. Sildar smiled. We can't go back now. Winter is approaching, Ulan said. I agree, replied Sildar. Besides, we already have some treasure. What treasure? It's not like we can sell the slaves now, Joti complained as he rolled up the map. We can barter them to our farmers as bonded labor. We also got the pelts and trophies. When the winter clears, we shall come back and loot the barrow my bondsman will guide us to, Sildar replied. Lear could tell the real source of Joti's ire. Lopt and some of the others had been given a chance to entertain themselves at the Vanayar's expense. Joti had not had the opportunity. Though Lear was having some difficulty keeping his wolf-like thoughts and his human thoughts separate, on this both the wolf and man agreed. These were evil men and deserved to die. He wondered if he could quietly and discreetly eliminate them, one by one, and thus avoid raising suspicion. The only thing that stayed his hand was that he was not sure he could slay them all quickly enough to prevent them from harming the women further. After his moral failure concerning Branwen, the Cimmerian knew he would feel more guilt if any of the women were harmed. Sildar turned back towards Lear. Lead on, since you know the mountains so well. Find me a quicker way home. The Picts spoke of a pass they would sometimes use to raid into your homeland. I can probably find it, though it may have Picts along it, Lear suggested. We've no fear of painted savages. Lead on, bondsman, Sildar declared. Lear wondered if the gods would grant him some luck, and have the passage be filled with a tribe of howling Picts intent on adding golden scalps to their war belts. The gods had no such plan. The trek proved almost idyllic. Lear led the Asir and their Vanayar captives up a sloping mountain trail. The carts, hauled by sure-footed mules, had little trouble. Though they could not be abreast, the snaking file of their march worked its way back and forth along a hidden alpine switchback. Along the way, mountain goats and badgers occasionally watched the humans progress up the mountainside. Ulf brought one of the goats down with an expert shot from his bow. The birds sang, and there was little to indicate to anyone watching that the party of men and women were on anything other than a leisurely stroll. Near the end of the day, Lear discovered signs that Pix had indeed used the trail. A hunter's lean-to that had been left in disrepair and a fire pit full of ashes told him that the Pix had not visited this camp in some time. "Dig a latrine for us over there, Elfgar," Sildar ordered. "We've thralls now, of a sort. Let them do the work," Elfgar complained. "You've a point. Bondsman, order your kin to prepare us a campsite," Sildar commanded Lear. Lear sighed. "This should go well," he sarcastically thought. He approached the Vanayar, who were naturally gravitating towards one another. With a grim look he greeted them, and they impassively waited for his instructions. He felt the indignity of the situation as well as they, and in his frustration he let his emotions show. He began directing the women. "These lazy, goat-buggering oafs are tired from the little walk they've taken today. You three set up a fire and get a kettle full of boiling water started. You lot, grab the spades and picks and dig us a latrine. You two, see about butchering that goat Ulf shot," Lear ordered. The women set about doing as Lear had ordered. Hulda stopped him. "What are you going to be doing?" she asked. "I am going to walk the edge of our campsite and make sure the Pix have left us no surprises," Lear replied. "To go walking and pickling alone is not to come back," she said. "They avoid me. I will go unmolested," Lear replied. "That's a pity," Hulda cruelly spat as she left. Lear gladly left the campsite. He was certain that the farther he was from the sharp-tongued redhead, the better he would feel. The edge of the campsite proved to be free of deadfalls, traps, and pit stakes. All Lear found in the way of traps were some forgotten cords that must have once belonged to noisemakers or snares. He was now very curious. He could not understand why the Pix had abandoned this place. Surely some tribe must hunt in the mountains often. He examined the ground and trees for signs of predators. Other than some old marks that suggested a bear was nearby, he saw no obvious threat. A single bear would not be a challenge for a party of Pictus hunters. Something strange was going on, and he feared it to be sorceress. He heard a soft footstep somewhere to his left. He dropped to the ground, and before he realized it, he was sniffing the air. He chided himself. He was not currently wearing the sign of Jebel Sag, and yet he was still acting, at least partially, like a wolf would. He waited patiently to see what, or who, would emerge from the trees where he had heard the sound. No one came into view. Stalking forward with his belly low to the ground, Lear slipped forward towards where he had heard the sound. He spent several moments, moving very slowly, so as not to be detected. He finally arrived at where he believed the sound had come from. It was just behind some birch trees. Lear examined the ground there very carefully. He found only some light footprints in the soil. From their size, he imagined that the prints belonged to either a young woman or a young boy. The prints revealed that the person who had made them had been barefoot. This struck Lear as extremely odd. At this altitude, a person would be cold, even without the northern winds and snow. He knew the Picts went about their days wearing a leather moccasin-like shoe. If the person who made these had been a Pict, why were they not wearing their footwear? While Lear was walking the edge of the campsite, Hulda was busy preparing food for the Aesir. She and Yonja had butchered the goat and were placing chunks of the meat inside the boiling water of their kettle. The work was complicated by the groping hands of the Aesir, who took to prodding and verbally harassing the women. Many of the women flinched instinctively from the contact. The Aesir made a game of it. They began daring one another to come ever closer to breaking Sildar's order, without straying over the line that separated what was and what was not permitted. When Hulda passed by Elfgar, he grabbed her hair and made little growls to mock her having lain with Lear. Hulda slipped out of the man's grasp and had to kick him to force him to let loose of her red tresses. "Remember your master's oath, dog!" she spat at Elfgar. Then she hustled away from him and back towards where the captured women were sheltering around the cooking fire. Elfgar snickered as the captured Vanir woman left him. He had no desire to risk Sildar's wrath and break the man's promise to the Black Mane. Yet he suspected that when they returned to Hadjigral, that the barbarian would be slain to free Sildar from his promise to the bondsman. It was not the Aesir's concern of how the Cimmerian was treated. In the Aesir's never-ending raids against the Vanir, and vice versa, the Cimmerians were sometimes allies to both. To Elfgar's way of thinking, a sometimes ally was an often foe. He watched Holda with hungry eyes, like a wolf awaiting the prey to fall to the ground exhausted. "Where is the Cimmerian?" one of the Aesir asked. "Skulking about the edges of the light," responded Joti, "doubtless avoiding his wife." The Aesir all laughed at the jest. "You should warm my bed, woman. I can show you pleasures the wildling can't," Elfgar teased her. Holda tried to ignore the mocking men. She was unsure why their jests angered her. She decided it must have simply been that they were villains, and the mockery was more degradation they could inflict upon her. She glanced at the woodlines constantly, seeking her husband. A dark thought began to whisper that he had run away, leaving the women to their fate. Yet she refused to believe that this could be true. She did not know Lear well, but she doubted that he was the kind of man that could be so callow as to hie off in the middle of the night. Lear returned an hour later, his mane unsettled and his face ever turned towards the wilderness. He sat near the Vanayar, but from uncertainty regarding him, they backed away. On another day he would have been angered, but the browbeating he had taken that morning from Holda still sat heavy in his heart. He sat with his back to the fire and watched the darkening night. He was dimly aware that someone was proffering him a bowl of stew. He blinked and was surprised to see that it was Holda looking down upon him and offering him the bowl. "Eat," she commanded him, her harsh word concealing a growing concern. "Not hungry," Lear mumbled. It was another of the childhood survival tools speaking. He had learned that if he ate less and made himself small, his mother would not beat him as much. "We've marched all day, and we'll be marching all day for weeks to come. Eat the damned stew, you ungrateful cur. You're no good to anyone dead," Holda snapped. Looking away from her, he took the bowl. Misinterpreting his body language, Holda scoffed aloud. She turned and walked away from Lear, loudly complaining, "What god did I offend to be married to such a weakling?" Lear set the bowl aside. All appetite had fled. The temptation to break his oath and paint the sign upon his face presented itself once again, and once more he resisted. While the others ate, he watched silently, envious of the simple social customs they all had mastered and which forever eluded him. Lear did not notice it, but Sildar noticed Elfgar slip away from the fire and try to discreetly walk around the circle towards the Vanir women. The Aesir stood and called aloud, "Elfgar, take the watch!" Elfgar cursed under his breath, and with a look that promised Holda that he would visit her later, he stalked towards the edge of the encampment. The Aesir muttered curses on his master to soothe the slight he felt. Men, even supposedly disciplined men, do not like being reminded that they are not their own masters. As Elfgar watched the ever-deepening gloom, he had to pace. Without the warmth of the fire, he would stiffen if he did not keep moving. The hours passed, and Elfgar sipped at the warmed mead to remain warm. His path took him around the camp, and when he had passed the carts, he heard the mules nicker nervously. Elfgar did not question this. The mead was warm, and he was feeling too irate to be concerned with whatever had upset the animals. Probably a bear on the prowl. It will avoid us so long as we have a fire going, thought Elfgar. He looked up into the night, occasionally to watch the marching of the planets and the stars. In later ages, the night sky would be obscured by artificial lights and man-made smoke. But above, this year, the sky whirled in pristine beauty. He identified the constellations and recalled the legends his people told of them. It was during this recitation that he failed to notice the approach of the beast. It had waited until the carts were between the man and his companions. It crept forward on its limbs. Though it had not been designed by nature for the movement, and should have had to slide on its belly to remain level, sorcery had made it possible that its legs and arms were now of equal length. The loping scuttle of the beast was complemented by the alterations in its spine, mutations that allowed it to keep its gaze level with its body and not stress its neck as a human would have to. It had closed its maw when it got near its prey, and did not breathe lest the prey hear its intake of breath. The sounds of other men and the crackle of their hated fire reached its ears. It would have to strike fast and carry away its prize. Yet as the beast prepared for the killing bite, the man turned. Before Elfgar fully turned to face the beast, it decided to change its tactics. The beast could not flee without the man raising an alarm, nor could it strangle the man down as it had intended. It would need to kill the man. It hated to kill without feasting, but better that than the Aesir turning on it and hunting it. Its long claws stretched out, and it raked them across the man's middle, where it knew the soft parts lay beneath the Aesir's thick clothing. Elfgar had time to register that a large shadow was rising from the ground below his eyesight's normal arc of vision. He had turned not because he thought he had heard a sound or felt any danger, but because he scented a rank odor. Thinking that one of his compatriots had failed to bury their scat properly, he had turned around to chide the man. The claw sunk through his mail and the padding beneath. Strength like he had never felt before opened up his belly. He looked at the hairy arms with their hands buried in his guts, and protested to the gods that it was impossible. Surely his mail should have protected him. He tried to scream, but the beast had torn apart his diaphragm. Gripping flesh inside of the body, the beast's claws ripped Elfgar open. His bowels fell to the ground, and the dying man had enough life left in him to see the horrid snout of a wolf thing bury itself in his chest. He felt it searching for something inside his body. The last sight Elfgar took with him into the darkness of death was of the stars twinkling above him. Lear felt a touch on his shoulder. The goddess of the leafy gown and red hair was shaking him roughly. She seemed frantic. "What the hell do you three want now?" he thought. He looked up to see the godly trio, each with a spear in her hand, circling him. They were facing away from him, and their attitude was clearly one of alert caution. Lear stood, and the goddesses parted for him. He glanced at Sildred to see if the Gothi could sense the three fairy women's presence, but the Aesir's face betrayed no sign of recognition. Then Lear heard something cracking. The popping sound was easy to mistake for the cracking of the logs that fueled the fire, and in truth, this is what Lear thought the sound to be. The sound was too regular. He approached Sildred in a crouch. "Give me a weapon," Lear commanded Sildred. "You do not give the orders here," Sildred rebuked him. "Give me a weapon, we are in danger," Lear said again. "Danger against what?" Sildred asked. He stood and looked around. Then in Pictish he taunted the shadowy knight. "Are there any short folk out there? I can make you shorter if you like." When no battle cry resounded from the dark trees, nor any Pictish arrows sped through the night, the Aesir all laughed. They were well fed, slightly drunk, and had the warmth of their fire. They felt safe. Lear walked back, still crouched low, to the Vanayar. Few of them could meet his gaze, because of his eldritch eyes. "We must stay near one another," Lear told them. "You just want to lay with us," one of the Vanayar accused him. "I will not molest you." "Do not trust him," hissed another of the Vanayar. Lear searched his memory for what he knew of the Vanir and their customs. He sought some tidbit of lore that would give him the proper words to gain their trust. Then he remembered the stratagem he had used with Sildred. "I will not molest any of you. I would never betray my wife," Lear told them. Huldah's face drained of its color. The women all watched her carefully to see if she not only believed Lear, but if there was any affection towards him. "What should I do? I don't wish to be thought of as a slattern, fawning over a man I was forced to bind myself to," Huldah thought. Aloud she hissed, "Well, you may keep your promise not to ravish us like a man, as the other men that have captured us, but you won't prove it by laying next to me." With that, Huldah turned her back on Lear, and the Vanayar looked to each other uneasily. "Why do you think we are in danger?" A Vanayar, who was slightly older than Huldah, asked. Lear turned to her and replied, "An intuition I cannot name. Some beast is stalking us just outside the limit of our sight. Earlier I saw some bear signs, so perhaps that is all it is, a hungry male trying to fatten up for the winter." "But you don't believe it to be so?" the Vanayar asked him. "No," Lear admitted. "I have learned to expect the worst. The gods appear to have plenty of it stored up for us, and are very generous with dispensing it about." The woman gave a short and bitter laugh. Something about her demeanor shifted in ways that Lear could not describe. Yet he was aware that something nebulous, but important, had improved. She gave the Vanyar next to her a silent message, and the women relented. "He's not laying next to me," Hulda spat. "Yes, you've established that," the woman that befriended Lear replied. "Nor I," said another Vanyar. "Nor I," said yet another. Lear did not take offense. He had not intended to lay next to anyone during the night anyway. The kinder Vanyar took his hand. "Fine. You wenches can brave the darkness with each other. He can lie next to me," she declared. The other women seemed content with this. Lear couldn't understand why they had relented so quickly. The seer had given the women blankets and furs. They had lashed these to the bars of the cage carts to create improvised shelters. The women guided Lear into the cage with her and directed him to lay down. He did so and tried to take up as little space as possible. She lay beside him and grabbed one of his arms. Putting her back to the man, she forced him to embrace her. "Why?" Lear asked her. "Why did you volunteer?" "Simple. You are warm," the woman replied. At first Lear thought the woman was being cruel, but then he realized that she had been jesting. He let out his own short and quiet laugh. Then he asked her, "Are you a lord or a noble? They seem to defer to you." "No, I'm no lord. I'm a common woman, just like most of them," she replied. Then she asked him, "What is your name? Hulda and the others just call you Wild Man." "I am Lear, son of Iphi, of Dun Sathak, of Samaria," he replied. "I am Jormungand," she informed him, "and I hope you don't snore." "No," Lear said quietly. Sleep did not come quickly. He became alert at each sound. This was an after effect of the mark of Jebel Sag. The Asir were creating quite a lot of noise and seemed intent on drinking all their mead in a single setting. Lear could not get comfortable either. He was aware, from a combination of scents and murmurs, of the women which surrounded him in the cage. In the dim light he could see the contours of female silhouettes clutching one another. He had never been in such a situation before, and the presence of so many women made him keenly nervous. He feared he would say or do the wrong thing, and they would all begin to berate or attack him. Then there was the warmth of Jormungand, cradled in his arms. He had no initial intentions of attempting an erotic adventure, even if he had possessed the suave persuasiveness and seduction that would require. But he was also a young man, laying amongst a plethora of women, and a warm one was cuddled in his arms. His body experienced a reaction. He shifted uncomfortably, trying not to let his hips touch Jormungand. The woman, however, was also wriggling, trying to get comfortable herself. Many times during the evening, Lear tried to move so that his lower body was not pressing against her. Finally, Jormungand let out an irritated sigh. She rolled over onto her face facing Lear and whispered, "Let's switch. Face the other way and I'll hold on to you. That way you won't have to be embarrassed by your condition." Lear swallowed hard, realizing she had felt his erection, and then did as he was told. "Yimmer, you're like a child," Jormungand whispered. "Haven't you ever slept with a woman?" "No, not really. I wasn't liked by my people. I never courted anyone, really. There was just once with Shyle, and then there was the night with Hulda," Lear whispered, trailing off. Jormungand's body tensed. She noticed he was staring at his wrist and the braid of hair entwined around it. She thought, "Freyja, his first love must have died. That's why he went mad. What do I do? I've never been a confessor for another's woes." She whispered in his ear, "Well, you're doing fine. Hulda will appreciate you eventually. I've known Hulda for a long time. She was born a brat and has just grown up to be a bigger one." "Why did you marry her?" "It seemed like a good idea at the time," Lear muttered. "Well, remember what you said about the gods having plenty of calamity and being willing to share it?" Jormungand joked. They both laughed quietly, but it was still loud enough that another Vanyar raised her head and shushed them. "Yes, mother," Jormungand sarcastically whispered back. This caused both her and Lear to share another series of short laughs. Though he had not lost his concern that they were in danger, Lear found himself feeling affection for the woman that now held him. An idea that perhaps she had chosen him for more than warmth crossed his mind. And being young, the idea grew more potent in the conviction of his mind. He touched her hand with his own and began to stroke it. "Lear," Jormungand whispered. "Yes?" he asked hopefully. "You are a decent fellow. But I have always desired other women," Jormungand whispered. In the dark she could not see Lear wince. "Crom laughs," he muttered with resignation. So, too, did Jormungand.